The airport was busy the way airports always are. Announcements echoing off the ceiling, rolling suitcases squeaking across the tile floor, children dragging their parents toward the gate. Flight 1147 to Los Angeles was boarding, and most passengers shuffled through the jetway quietly, tired, just wanting to sit down and close their eyes for a few hours. Nobody paid much attention to the broad-shouldered man in the dark jacket and sunglasses who stepped aboard near the back of the boarding line. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had all the time in the world. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't pushing. He simply placed one foot in front of the other, found his seat near the middle of the aircraft, tucked his bag beneath the seat in front of him, and sat down without making a sound. That man was Steven Seagal. He wasn't there to be recognized. He wasn't there to perform. He was just a man who wanted a quiet flight, a few hours of stillness in a world that never seemed to slow down. He leaned his head back, folded his hands in his lap, and breathed. That peace lasted exactly 11 minutes. It started with noise. Loud, ugly, entitled noise. 3 rows ahead, a stocky man in a wrinkled gray shirt was arguing with a flight attendant who had politely asked him to consolidate his bags so another passenger could use the overhead bin. The man's name was Marcus, and Marcus did not like being asked to do anything. "You work for the airline," he snapped, loud enough for the first 8 rows to hear clearly. "You figure it out. That's your job, not mine." The flight attendant, a young woman named Dana who had been working this route for 2 years, kept her voice professional and kind. "Sir, I just need a little cooperation so everyone can board." Marcus laughed, the kind of laugh that isn't friendly at all. "Cooperation, right. You know what? Move your hands off my bag before I make a complaint." Several passengers exchanged glances. A man in row 7 pulled his headphones tighter over his ears. A grandmother 2 seats back clutched her purse a little closer. Everyone was doing the same silent calculation. How bad is this going to get? Steven watched without turning his head, just his eyes, calm and steady, tracking the situation the way a hawk tracks movement from high above a field. He wasn't alarmed. He'd seen this before. Anger wearing the costume of confidence. Noise pretending to be power. Marcus finally shoved his bags wherever he pleased and dropped into his seat, muttering under his breath about how nobody respected paying customers anymore. The boarding continued. People filed in, babies settled, teenagers plugged in, business travelers opened laptops. Then Marcus stood up again. Nobody was sure why. Maybe he forgot something, maybe he just wanted everyone to look at him. But he pushed himself out of his seat and started moving through the aisle in the wrong direction, bumping shoulders, knocking into armrests, refusing to turn sideways to let others pass, even though the aisle was barely wide enough for one person. When he reached Steven's row, he stopped. Maybe it was the stillness. Maybe it was the sunglasses. Maybe it was the quiet dignity that some people find offensive because it makes them feel loud by comparison. Whatever it was, Marcus decided this was the man he wanted to talk to. "Hey," Marcus pointed, "you got a problem with me?" Steven didn't look up immediately. When he did, his gaze was level, unbothered. "No." Marcus tilted his head. "You sure? Because you're sitting there all quiet like you think you're better than everyone." Steven said nothing. That silence did something to Marcus. It was like dropping a match and watching someone refuse to react to the flame. It made the person holding the match angrier, not calmer. Marcus leaned against the seat. "Oh, the strong, silent type. That it?" Steven replied quietly, "I'd just like a peaceful flight." Marcus laughed again. "Peaceful.
He said the word like it tasted bad. He turned to look at the passengers around him. Get a load of this guy. Peaceful, like we're all just supposed to tiptoe around so he can have his peaceful flight. A few people looked away. One man pretended to sleep. A little girl across the aisle pressed herself against her mother's arm. Marcus turned back. I'll be as loud as I want, you understand me? Nobody on this plane tells me how to act. Steven nodded slowly. That's fine. The agreement bothered Marcus more than an argument would have. He wanted friction. He wanted someone to push back so he could push harder. Steven was giving him nothing to grab onto. Marcus leaned in closer. You military? Cop? You got that look. No. Then what do you do? Steven looked at him calmly. I'm retired. Marcus smirked. Retired. He backed up slightly, laughing to himself. Retired man thinks he's tough. All right, we'll see about that. He walked back to his seat. The boarding door sealed shut. The plane began to pull back. For 12 beautiful minutes, everything was quiet. Then the drinks cart came through. Dana was moving carefully down the aisle, smiling, offering water and juice, doing her job the way she always did. When she reached Marcus, she asked politely what she would like. He grabbed 2 cans of soda without saying thank you. Then, as she moved to continue past him, he stuck his leg out slightly into the aisle. Dana stumbled. She caught herself on the armrest, but 2 cups of ice water tilted off the cart and splashed across the laps of the couple seated across from Marcus. The woman gasped. The man jumped up, water dripping from his shirt. Dana apologized instantly, helping them with napkins, mortified. And Marcus laughed. He actually laughed. That was the moment the cabin shifted. Passengers who had been giving Marcus the benefit of the doubt, maybe he's just having a bad day, maybe he'll calm down, those passengers stopped believing that story. This wasn't a bad day. This was a bad person making choices. Dana's hands were shaking slightly as she straightened the cart. The couple across from Marcus dried themselves in silence, not wanting to escalate. Steven had watched it all. His breathing hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had sharpened. Marcus, sensing he'd gotten away with it, grew bolder. He turned to the soaked couple and grinned. Maybe watch where you put your elbows next time. The man in the wet shirt looked up. That was the attendance cart. We didn't do anything. Marcus shrugged. Looked like your fault from here. The man stood slightly. Are you serious right now? Oh, sit down, Marcus waved him off. Big guy in a wet shirt. Very scary. Several passengers spoke at once. Hey, that's not right. Leave them alone. She stumbled because of you. Marcus turned to face the cabin like he was addressing an audience. Oh, good. Everyone's got opinions. Wonderful. He spread his arms. Anybody else want to add something? Nobody answered. The plane had reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign turned off, and Marcus decided it was time to walk again. He moved through the aisle like he owned it, shoulders wide, forcing people to pull their elbows in. When he reached Steven's row again, he stopped. You're still sitting there. Marcus said it like an accusation. I am. Marcus crossed his arms. You saw what happened up there. I did. And you just sat there. Steven replied evenly. There were crew members handling it. Marcus snorted. Crew members? You mean the girl I almost knocked over? That was not an accident. Steven's voice hadn't changed volume at all, but something in it had changed texture. Marcus blinked. What did you say? Steven looked at him directly. You put your leg out intentionally. Those people got soaked because of a choice you made. The cabin went very quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people minding their business, the held breath quiet, of people watching something they don't know how to stop. Marcus's face darkened. "Who do you think you are?" Steven said nothing. "Nobody asked for your opinion," Marcus continued, stepping closer. "You know what I think? I think you're one of those guys who talks a lot and does nothing. You sit back, observe, make your little comments. Big man."
Steven remained still. Marcus was right in front of him now, towering slightly, trying to use his size the way he always did. "You got something to say. Say it like a man. Stand up." Steven didn't move. "Stand up," Marcus repeated, louder. From across the aisle, a teenage boy muttered, "Bro, just leave him alone." Marcus turned on him instantly. "You say something?" The boy shrunk back. "No." "That's what I thought." Marcus turned back to Steven. "See that? Nobody does anything. They all just watch." He jabbed a finger toward Steven's shoulder. "And you're the biggest coward of all." Steven looked at the finger, then back at Marcus's face. "Please step back." "Or what?" Steven said nothing more. He simply held the eye contact, completely still, the way a deep ocean holds still even when wind moves across its surface. Marcus shoved him, both hands on Steven's shoulder, an actual push. The plane wobbled slightly from air pressure outside, and Marcus used it like cover, like it hadn't been deliberate. Several passengers gasped. Dana came rushing forward. "Sir, you cannot put your hands on another passenger. This is your final warning. I will have the captain informed." Marcus turned to her. "Go ahead. Call your little captain." Marcus turned back to Steven, still just sitting there. "Come on, stand up." Steven stood up. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music, no slow motion. He simply unfolded from his seat the way a mountain unfolds from the horizon when you drive toward it. And suddenly, he was standing, and the air in the cabin rearranged itself around him. Marcus was still the same size, but somehow he looked smaller. "You wanted me to stand," Steven said quietly. "Here I am." Marcus swallowed. Yeah, here you are. Big deal." "I'm asking you one time," Steven continued, voice low and clear. "Return to your seat. Leave the crew alone. Leave the passengers alone. This doesn't have to go further." Marcus let out a short, hard laugh. "You're asking me? You're asking me?" He looked around at the cabin. "This guy is asking me like I report to him." Several passengers were now recording on their phones. A man in row 20 had already typed a message to his wife that simply said, "There is a crazy man on this plane, and someone is about to put him in his place, I think." Marcus suddenly shoved the drinks cart hard. It rolled and crashed into the seat across the aisle, sending cups and cans scattering. The little girl who had been watching from her mother's arms screamed. That was enough. Steven stepped into the aisle, not charging forward, not swinging. He simply moved the way water moves when a dam opens, natural, inevitable, calm. Marcus grabbed a full can of soda off the floor and hurled it directly at Steven's chest. Everyone in the cabin heard the impact. Or rather, everyone expected to hear an impact. What they heard instead was a soft sound, almost nothing, because Steven had turned slightly, just a fraction, the kind of shift that looks like adjusting your posture, and the can grazed past him and clattered harmlessly against the far wall. Marcus stared. What? He grabbed a second can and swung it. Steven raised one hand, open palm, and the swing was redirected the way you redirect a river by placing a single stone, gently, precisely. Marcus's arms swung wide, carrying his own body with it,
Momentum doing the work Steven never needed to do. Marcus stumbled. Steven steadied him, an actual courtesy. He caught Marcus by the elbow before the man could fall face first into someone's lap. Marcus wrenched his arm free. "Don't touch me!" He whipped around and swung a fist directly at Steven's jaw. Hard, fast, furious. It passed through empty air. Steven had leaned back exactly 1 inch, just one. The punch sailed past, and Marcus's body followed it, spinning slightly, completely off balance. "He's not there," someone whispered from row 15. "He just moves like he's not there." Marcus found his footing and planted himself. He was breathing hard now, face red, embarrassment and alcohol and rage all mixing into something unstable. He lowered his shoulder and rushed forward, full body, trying to tackle Steven into the seats.
Steven didn't brace. He didn't widen his stance dramatically. He simply shifted his center slightly and let Marcus arrive. When Marcus reached him, it was like running into a wall that knew how to move. Steven absorbed the rush, turned with it, and guided Marcus downward using the man's own force. One arm hooked, one pivot, and Marcus went from running forward to sitting on the ground in the middle of the aisle, blinking up at the ceiling. He hadn't been swammed, he hadn't been struck, he had simply been placed. The cabin erupted, not loud cheering, more like the collective exhale of 50 people who had been holding their breath. Disbelief, amazement, relief. Marcus looked up at Steven from the floor. His chest was heaving. His anger was still there, but something else had crept in beside it. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertainty. "How?" Marcus started. "How did you didn't even—" Steven crouched down so they were closer to eye level. His voice was low and private, not performing for the cabin. It was something between them. "You've been trying to be the most powerful person everywhere you go," Steven said. "That's exhausting. Real strength isn't about scaring people." Marcus's lip trembled. He wanted to come back with something sharp, something cutting, but the words wouldn't form. Steven continued. "You hurt that couple with the water. You frightened a child. You put your hands on me and on the crew. Those were choices. You made every single one of them." "Stop." Marcus's voice was rough. Steven stood slowly. "The decisions you make don't disappear just because the flight lands." Marcus sat on the floor of the aisle with every eye on him. He had started this flight as a man who believed power meant volume. He had spent the last 20 minutes learning something very different. Dana approached, composed again now, steady. "Sir, I need you to take your seat and remain there for the rest of the flight. Security will meet us at the gate." Marcus didn't argue. He pulled himself up using the armrests, slower now, heavier. He wouldn't look at anyone. He moved back toward his row and sat down. The cabin was quiet for a moment. Then, from somewhere near the back, a single person started clapping, then another, then a third, and within seconds the whole cabin was applauding, not the aggressive kind, not mocking or triumphant, just genuine gratitude and relief pouring out of people who had been scared and now were safe. Steven returned to his seat. He adjusted his jacket sleeve. He exhaled, the same exhale as before. Nothing in his bearing suggested that anything unusual had happened. He had just wanted a peaceful flight after all. But the cabin had other plans, because 3 rows back, an elderly man in a faded army cap had been staring at Steven for the past several minutes with an expression of absolute certainty. He turned to his wife. He said it too loud, the way people do when they're too stunned to remember volume.
That's Steven Seagal. His wife turned and looked. She covered her mouth with both hands. The man repeated it to the person in front of him. That's Steven Seagal, the actor, the martial artist, Aikido master. That's him. And like a stone dropped in still water, the information spread outwards through the cabin. Phones that had been recording went still as passengers suddenly understood what they'd captured. A teenager near the back stood up slightly and stared forward and said to nobody in particular, "I knew it. I knew something was different about him. Nobody moves like that except one person." Dana turned and looked at Steven, and then looked away again and looked back again. Her colleague touched her arm. "Is that—" Dana nodded slowly. "I think so." A young boy across from Steven's seat had been watching the whole thing from behind his mother's arm. He looked at Steven now with enormous eyes. "Are you a superhero?" Steven turned to the boy and smiled, the first full smile he had shown the entire flight. "No, just someone who tries to do the right thing." The boy considered this seriously. "Like Batman, but without the cape?" Steven chuckled. "Something like that." The news reached Marcus last. He heard the name pass from row to row like a wave, and he lifted his head and heard someone say it clearly. "Steven Seagal, right there in row 14. Marcus went pale. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He turned his head slowly toward the man he had spent the last half hour trying to bully, the man who had caught his punches like they were softballs, the man who had placed him on the ground using one arm, the Aikido master, the man who had trained his whole life in martial arts and channeled every bit of that training into choosing not to use it. Marcus whispered to nobody. He could have. He whispered again. He could have at any point. That was the part that broke Marcus completely. Not the embarrassment, not the cameras, not the security waiting at the gate. The realization that Steven Seagal had been in complete control from the very first second and chosen again and again to respond with patience instead of force. A flight attendant from the front of the cabin walked back and stood in the aisle and looked at Steven with wide eyes. "Mr. Seagal, I want to apologize on behalf of the crew that you had to experience this." Steven shook his head. "Don't apologize. Your crew handled themselves professionally under pressure. That's the real story here." The attendant blinked, composing herself. "Thank you. Thank you for keeping everyone safe." 2 security officers boarded the moment the plane connected to the gate. They came down the aisle quietly and efficiently and stood beside Marcus, who did not resist, did not argue, did not say a word. Before they moved him forward, Marcus turned, not to the cameras, not to the cabin. He turned to Steven.
His voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry for all of it. I didn't—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "I didn't know who you were, but that's not—" He shook his head. "That shouldn't matter. I'm sorry." Steven looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, simply, honestly, the kind of thing that sounds obvious until you actually hear it spoken aloud by the right person at the right time. "The apology isn't for me," Steven said. "It's for the woman whose hands were shaking while she held her daughter. It's for the couple you soaked with water. It's for the teenager you snapped at for doing nothing. When you figure out how to give it to them, it'll mean something." Marcus nodded. His eyes were wet. He allowed himself to be guided off the plane. The rest of the cabin disembarked slowly, people taking their time,
many of them stopping briefly at row 14. A mother with 2 small children said, "Thank you so much," without explaining exactly what she was thanking him for, because she didn't need to. An older man shook Steven's hand and held it an extra second. A teenager asked if he could shake his hand for his grandfather, who had all of his movies and would absolutely not believe this story. Steven accepted each one with the same quiet grace he had carried the entire flight. By the time he walked through the terminal, the videos were already everywhere. The clips captured different angles: the moment Marcus shoved the cart, the punch that passed through empty air, the almost invisible shift of Steven's body that made every attack miss, the single-arm takedown that looked more like a dance move than a defensive technique. And woven through all of it, frame after frame, was the same image: Steven Seagal, standing perfectly still, perfectly calm, a man who had every tool available to him and chose deliberately and repeatedly to use the gentlest one. The comments poured in by the millions. People wrote that they had shown the clip to their fathers, their children, their students. Martial arts instructors posted analysis videos. Philosophers quoted ancient texts about the nature of real strength. Teachers assigned it as a discussion topic. Children asked their parents why the man never got angry. And the parents, searching for words, landed on the same answer every time: because he didn't need to. Marcus posted a short video 6 days later. He sat in front of a plain wall, no music, no editing, just a man and his words. He said he had been angry for years, not at the people on that flight, but at things he hadn't dealt with, and he had aimed that anger outward at strangers because it was easier than looking at himself. He said Steven Seagal had not humiliated him. He said Steven Seagal had held up a mirror. He said he was working on it. The internet, which had been ready to tear him apart, paused. Then it did something unexpected. It listened. Because that's the other thing about real strength. It doesn't just protect the people around it. Sometimes it reaches the person who needed it most, even when that person was the one who started the whole thing. Flight 1147 landed on time. Nobody was seriously hurt. A little girl told her daycare class the next morning that she had met a superhero on an airplane, and he didn't have a cape, and he never even raised his voice, and she thought that was the most powerful thing she had ever seen. She was absolutely right.